Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm thrilled to have you all here as we take a deep dive into Zoho Forms and explore how its advanced approval workflows can streamline and automate approval processes for your business. Before starting the session, we would like to give you an overview of Zoho meeting tools that you will be using throughout. You can participate in the session by conversing through the chat tab. We have a questions tab where you can post your questions during the QA session that will be conducted later. Our colleagues will be monitoring it, so any question you ask will be answered promptly. We'll also be rolling out a few polls in the meantime. You can access them via the polls tab. I'm Shruti, your host for the session. Today, I'm going to try to set up an expense reimbursement workflow for a team trip. Now, if you've ever had to deal with sorting out all the expenses for a trip, say transportation or meals or hotels, you know that the approval process can get a bit messy, especially when different departments are involved. But don't worry, I'm not doing it alone. I've got Samhita with me, a product expert from Zoho Forms, who will walk with me throughout the entire process. First of all, I'd love to hear from you. How does your organization currently handle approvals? Is it still email threads and spreadsheets? Or a manual form that gets passed around? Is it just a basic online form with no automation? Or do you have a fully automated workflow? Let us know by voting in the poll. Thank you for the votes. So, I'm starting by thinking through the approval process for this team trip. I know there'll be multiple levels, like the team manager, the department head, finance, and maybe even an executive chair if the expenses go over a certain amount. But before we dive into that, I'm curious. What's the difference between basic approvals and advanced approvals in Zoho Forms? And why, Samhita, should I choose advanced approvals for this scenario?
Hi, Shruti. That's a great question. Both basic and advanced approvals in Zoho Forms support multi-level workflows, but the key difference lies in the level of customization and control they offer. Basic approvals are great for straightforward sequential workflows. For example, if your team trip expenses need to go through the team manager, then the department head, and then finally finance, basic approvals can handle this perfectly. It's simple, easy to set up, and works well for workflows without specific conditions or branching paths. Now, with advanced approvals, you get additional flexibility. For instance, if the total expenses exceed a specific amount, you can automatically escalate the approval to an executive chair. For your team trip, if you anticipate straightforward multi-level approvals, basic up workflows might suffice, but if you want to add conditional logic like handling high value reimbursements differently, advanced approvals are the way to go.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's say I've created an expense form with all the relevant fields, like the type of expense, whether it's meals or transport or even lodging, and the total amount spent. Now, I'm thinking about how to set up the approval flow for this team trip. For example, if the expenses are under $500 and non travel, I assume it's an easy approval for the team manager. But if it's over $500 or if it's travel related, it has to go to the department head, right?
All right, Shruti, thank you for configuring the form in advance. Let me check if you have the fields that are required for configuring the approval workflow. So you have the expense amount and the type of expense with the options configured. So we'll directly head to the approvals tab and click configure. So since our workflow has a lot of conditions to be configured, we'll go with advanced approval workflow. Our first level is going to be for the team manager, and if the request has an expense amount less than 500, then this is the level that your submission will go to. So let's name this level as team manager and keep this as with conditions so that you can configure conditions. You can also have it without conditions, but since this level has got conditions to be configured, we are going with condition and add conditions. So our first condition is going to be less than 500 and not traveling. So it's always a good practice to keep naming your conditions as you configure them. So if you have missed any configuration later when you're testing your approvals, it will be easier for you to go through your configuration and tweak them. So if the expense amount is less than 500 and the type of expense is not travel, then you will assign it to Akash, who is your team manager. Right. So you can mark this level as the final approval and complete this approval process if this condition is satisfied. So this option will not let the submission to go through the next levels if you configure once this condition is satisfied. So we're marking it as final approval and hit done. Our next condition would be less than 500 and traveling. So if the expense amount is less than 500 and the type of expense is travel, then you let the system auto approve such submission and mark this as final approval. Right? Done. Now we also have a third condition for this level which deals with the edge case. But what if your expense amount is greater than or equal to 500? So let's name this greater than or equal to 500. So what this approval workflow has to do is if the expense amount is greater than or equal to 500, it should go to your team manager Akash for approval and then go to the department head for the next level of approval. So to configure this, let's say expense amount is greater than or equal to 500. You assign this to your team manager Akash. And you're not marking this as final approval because it still has to go through the next level, which is department head for the approval process. So you're not marking this as final approval and complete the approval process here if the condition is satisfied. Right. You can have this as auto deny just to be on the safer side, because this is something related to expenses that you don't want to get auto approved if you've missed some condition. So these are the three conditions that come within the team manager level. less than 500 and not traveling, and it's marked as final approval if this is satisfied. Less than 500 and traveling, this is also marked as final approval if this is satisfied. And this is greater than or equal to 500, which is approved by the team manager, and then it should go to the next level that we're going to configure. So everything looks fine here, and we also have configured our default statement to auto deny. Let's go to the next thing. Okay, we are configuring notifications here. I think I'm not going to touch that now. Let's first configure all the levels and conditions first, and then save this. I'm skipping that part because that can be done later here in this tab. So I'm adding my next level for the department head for expenses which are greater than 500. Let's name it as department head, and we're going to configure it with conditions again. Add your condition and name this as greater than or equal to 500. Again, you'll have two cases here for traveling and for not traveling. So that will be our second condition. Let's stick to the first one now. The first one is greater than or equal to 500 and traveling. So you have expense amount greater than or equal to 500. And also, this should be less than 1000. We're not using the equal to sign here because that's how the workflow should work. So expense amount is less than $1,000. It should go to your department head, who is Akbar. Right, and we mark this as final approval so that it ends here if this condition is satisfied. Click done. And the next condition would be greater than or equal to 500 and not traveling. Let's rename this. So if your expense amount is greater than or equal to 500 and your expense amount is less than $1,000, and the type of expense is not travel, you assign this to a different department head, who is Alvin, and mark this as final approval and complete the process. Okay, so here we haven't configured the condition for travel. As you see, we've configured only the expense amount. So we add one more condition here where it says expense amount, the type of expense is travel. Right, so this is the first condition where the expense amount is greater than or equal to 500 but less than 1000, and it is for travel. It's assigned to one department head, and if it's greater than or equal to 500 and not for travel, it goes to a different department head. And we have marked both these levels as final approvals if the conditions are satisfied, so that they don't traverse through the next levels of approval that we're going to configure. So by default, we're keeping this as auto approve because I think we have pretty much included all the conditions. And save this. So our next level is going to be for the finance head if the expense amount is going to be greater than 1000 and less than 2500. So let's name this level as finance head, configure it with conditions, add your first condition, which is it should be greater than or equal to $1000 because we're not covering that in the previous level. We're not covering the case where it could be equal to 1000, so we're covering this here. If it's equal to 1000, it should come to the finance head. So we're covering it here and this, and also it should be less than $2,500. So your expense amount is greater than or equal to 1000 and your expense amount is less than or equal to 2500. I think we can add an equal to here because anything greater than 2500 should directly go to the CEO. So greater than 1000, greater than or equal to 1000 and less than or equal to 2500. This should go to your finance head, is Chloe. And you mark this as final approval if this condition is satisfied. And you click done. And just check if everything is fine. Expense analysis is greater than or equal to 1000, less than or equal to 2500. You go to Chloe. Right. Save this. Now, what if the expense is unusually greater than $2,500? In this case, it should directly go to the level CEO. So we're going to configure our last level with condition which is greater than 2,500. So if the expense amount is greater than 2,500, it should go to your CEO, sign approver, Pankaj. Right? You don't have to mark this as your final approval. You can mark it as final approval as well. It doesn't make any difference because this is the last level. And you click done. So I'm going to change the default statement here to auto deny so that if I have missed any condition that's to be configured, it doesn't go auto approved without anyone reviewing it. You click next and save this. So that's how you configure multiple levels of approval, Shruti.
That's really smart. I can already see how this will make things so much easier. But managing approvals can still be tricky. Tell us, guys, what's your biggest challenge in managing approvals? Is it tracking who needs to approve what process? Or delays in getting approvals on time? Or simply keeping everyone updated on the status? Please drop your answers in the poll. Thank you for participating in the poll. And moving on, here's something I'm curious about. As the firm moves through all these levels of approval, how can we ensure that everyone stays on top of the process? For example, how do we set up notifications so that the team manager gets a prompt when the form is ready for review? And how does the employee get notified when their form is approved or if it needs revisions? And what if someone forgets to approve it on time?
So you want to configure notifications that you need to send to the approvers when they receive a form submission for approval, and also to the respondents when their submission has been approved. So these notifications you can configure at each level. So for now, I'll give you an example with the help of one level. So as I said, you can configure notifications at any stage, even after you configure the levels, under this tab, which is notifications and field permissions. So here you can configure record review notification, which is sent to the approvers when they receive a new submission for approval. And you can also send level completion notification, which will be sent when this level is marked as complete. So for now, we'll configure email notification that needs to be sent to the approvers when they receive a new submission for approval. So you hit configure, and the to address will be the level approver. So if there are multiple approvers to this level, the notification will be sent to all the approvers. You already have a pre-written email message for you. You can edit it and add any field responses you want here and click save. So this is configured for this level. Similarly, you can configure level complete notification, which will be sent when this level is marked as complete by hitting configure, and you choose the email ID of the respondent, and there's also a pre-written message here, and you click save. So you also have this field permissions option here. By default, all the fields in your form will be visible to the approvers in this level, and they will be visible in read-only mode. So if you want to edit the permissions where the approvers should be able to make any edits to the fields, then you can edit the field permissions here and change any field's permission to write as you see here. But since you do not require this for your workflow, I'm not touching this right now. And you also asked me how you can send reminder notifications for pending approvals to the approvers. For that, you have the settings tab here, and you go to schedule pending notifications. You can send the pending notifications to the form approval admin and to the approvers as well. So for your workflow, I'm going to configure it for the approvers alone. You click configure here, and you can send the email for pending approvals either in all levels, or you can choose the specific levels that you want to send pending notifications for. So I'm keeping it as all levels for this workflow. You can choose the frequency at which they should be reminded through these notifications. You can choose it as daily, every 2 days, every 3 days, or you can also send weekly reminders. So for your workflow, let me keep this as every 2 days. You can also choose a time at which they should be reminded. The rest of the things are already pre-filled. The level approvals for all the levels will be reminded at this frequency at this time, and you can click save. You can always disable the schedule status here.
I should say, I love the reminders feature. So let's say I've set up all the rules, notifications, and conditional workflows. Before I hit go and roll this out for the team trip approval process, how do I test everything to make sure it works as expected? I don't want to risk any hiccups during the actual approval process. Samita, please help me with this.
Right, Shruti. Testing your approval workflow before rolling it out is definitely essential to ensure it runs smoothly. Luckily, Zoho Forms makes it easy to simulate the process and identify any issues. So once your form is fully designed and the approval workflow is set up, click the Access Form button in the top right corner of your form builder. This will open a live version of your form in a new tab. Then you can fill out the form as if you were an employee submitting a reimbursement request and add any comments or notes and check if the test submission is routed correctly to the team manager, department head, finance department, or executive based on the conditions that you've set. And you can ask your colleagues to help simulate the different roles. confirm the workflow adjust accordingly for each scenario. If you notice any issues like approvals, skipping levels of notifications, not triggering, go back to the approval workflow section and tweak your conditions or settings. So once you've run multiple tests and are confident about everything and everything is working as expected, your workflow is ready to roll out.
Thank you so much, Samita, for walking me through the details. It is clear that Zoho Forms offers a seamless way to handle complex approval processes for team expenses like a team trip without the headache of manually routing forms around. I feel so much more confident setting this up for my team now. Also, to everyone watching, I hope today's session helped you understand how to use Zoho Forms to automate and simplify your own approval workflows, whether it's for travel, office supplies, or even larger project related expenses. We are now in the last leg of the webinar. You can ask all your questions in the QA tab. Meanwhile, we'll run our last poll for the day. We've diverted from our usual style and forayed into a chat style webinar this time. Did you guys find it easier to follow? The options are yes and no. Please vote if you like this session. I can see that many of you liked it, and that's fantastic to hear. Thank you all for being such an engaged audience. We will be wrapping up our QA session now. Any other questions you have, please send them to us at support@zohoforms.com, and our support team is here to help you with that. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be sending out the webinar recording if you want to revisit any part of this session. Thanks again for the enthusiastic participation in the polls and the QA session. Stay safe, take care, and I hope to meet you all soon. Thanks, guys.